All right, so let's get started with Hangman. So we are going to be recreating the word game Hangman. Pretty simple. So it says here, in addition to building the app end-to-end independently, you'll learn the power of chaining array transformations like map and filter, which is a pillar of functional programming. We can take a look at our primary objectives. So your interface should contain the following components. One component that displays the puzzle word, and letters should be separated by spaces. Letters that haven't been guessed should be displayed as an underscore. Letters that have been guessed should be displayed. You should also have a component that contains a text input and button to submit the guessed letter. If the letter submitted has already been guessed, we display an alert. And we should have a component that displays letters that are not part of the puzzle word. And it says here our only things in state for app.js should be puzzle and guessed letters. And it says right here, they have a JSON array for us. We need to store it and import it appropriately in the code base we created. So it looks like we don't need to actually display like a drawing of a hanged man or anything like that. We just need to have a guessing game, essentially. So I've already taken the liberty of creating the React project without having to wait through it this time. I'm going to npm start. And there we go. All right, great. We have our React app up and running. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of all this filler stuff, the default things for app.js. All right, so we take a look at our requirements again. So there should only be two properties with app.js's state, puzzle and guest letters. So we can add that first. So app is a functional component, right? So how do we access state and allow it to be used by this component?
We need to import the hook. That would be right after it's from the same file, React, and use state.
Exactly. So we'd import something called use state. And then we could say something like const, what are they called? Puzzle and guest letters. So puzzle and set puzzle equal use state. And we'll set this one to a blank string. And then const guest letters and set guest letters equals use state with an empty array as the default argument. So if we check this out and open up our inspector, we should be able to see that these live in our hooks. Yep, there they are. All right, now let's talk about importing our words here. So we have an array of words. I can copy this. And if I really wanted to, I could just copy it into app.js, but that's not really the React way of doing things, and it's not something I should be able to count on. So I'm going to create a file for it. I'll call this one, I don't know, words.js. What I'm going to say is I'm going to export default these words. And then here I'm going to say import words from ./words.js. And if I console.log words, I should be able to see them. There they are. Okay, so we have we've loaded our data at least, and we have state ready to accept these two things, right? So what's next? It says here that we need 3 more components. In that case, I'm going to make a folder for components. And inside that folder, I'm going to make 3 more folders, one for the display, one for the text input, and one for the other display that displays the guessed letters that aren't in the word. So we can make a folder for, we can call it puzzle display. And inside puzzle display, I'll make a file puzzle display.js. Then I can make another folder. Let's call this one letter input. And I'll make a file called letterinput.js. And one more for, let's call it wrong letters. Wrong letters.js. All right, so now we have our files ready to go. So let's start with our puzzle display. And if we take a look right here, it says a component that displays the puzzle word, letters should be separated by spaces. Letters that haven't been guessed should be displayed as an underscore. Letters that have been guessed should be displayed. All right, so before we even get into making this happen though, should we make this a class component or a functional component?
Functional?
Yeah, why not? We can import React. Did I do that wrong? From React, duh. Well, this one, function puzzle display. Like so. Is this thing going to accept any props?
Yes, it should receive the game word or the puzzle word.
Yep. And then we're going to export default puzzle display down here. I'm going to make my return function. Just have it return a div for now. And then in here, I'm going to import puzzle display from ./components/puzzle display/puzzle display.js. Let's just make sure we can render it before we do anything else. I'm going to put a puzzle display here. All right. So we have our puzzle display. It's there. It's not showing anything yet, but it does exist. All right. So now that we have our puzzle display, we need to do 2 things. Before we even really get into the functionality of this, we need to make sure that when we load the page, that we update our puzzle to be a random one of the words from words. So how might we do that?
Using the math library, random.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So perhaps we could just do this. So set puzzle to words, and it would be math dot. I always forget how to do random integers in this. Math I'm just going to look this up before I make a fool of myself.
Math.floor, parentheses. The math.floor, parentheses, math.random.
Random
Parentheses, close, yep, times the, you got it as words, so times words.length.
Yep, thank you. Let's see if that works. All right. Uh-oh. Too many re-renders. React limits the number of renders to prevent an infinite loop. So it looks like just using set puzzle right here isn't seemed like a good idea. It looks like it kind of created an infinite loop of some kind. Let's see if there's any other things that can tell us here. Too many re-renders. So essentially, when you set a hook like this, it just triggers a re-render immediately and instantly and just keeps on doing that because React automatically re-renders every time you set state. So what I'm telling it right now is set state, like change the state, which triggers a re-render, which triggers it setting state again, which causes an infinite loop. So I'm going to copy this line just so that we can make use of it later. So we need to find a way to do this only when the DOM loads and not before the first time. So let's see if there's a way we can do that. So we did like React event listener when DOM loads. Let's see what comes up. That's plain JavaScript.
Is there a component did load equivalent? Because that's what you would do for a class-based view, but
Yeah,
right.
So that's good. So the React lifecycle is something we haven't really gotten into in great detail yet. But so we take a look here, state and lifecycle. There's class-based components have something called component did mount, component did update, and other things that are essentially event listeners for when certain things change. And if we want to do that in a functional component, it's a little bit different. So if I'm remembering correctly, the functional component of that is use effect. So it says right here, the effect hook lets you perform side effects in a function component. It says right here, use effect is we import it much like use state. And it's similar to component did mount or component did update. So essentially, when we do that, we should be able to do that, have this called only when the component mounts, when it gets added to the DOM. So I just want to make sure we're not doing anything wrong here. Let's try it out. So I'm going to add use effect here. And then I'm going to say, all right, so it says right here, so we could just run use effect, put in an anonymous function inside. We want to set puzzle. Actually, just going to paste that line we did earlier, like so. So let's see if that works for us and doesn't trigger an infinite reload. Nope, maybe it did. Maybe that didn't work. Yeah, this can happen when a component calls set state inside use effect. The use effect either doesn't have a dependency array or one of the dependencies changes every render. All right, so that's not quite right either. So I think we're on the right track. If you want to say like, update state in React when component mounts. So understanding the React lifecycle is kind of one of the biggest challenges here. So it says here, they have a ticking clock example. So they use something here called react-dom.render to change the rendered output. That's not exactly what I want, I think. Converting a function to a class, that's not what I want either.
This one might kind of seem like cheating, but can we go back and look at your, I guess, the line that has the puzzle and how you're defining the words in the use state? Instead of setting it to a blank like we do on line 6 there, couldn't we put in the inside of parentheses of line 10?
Like so?
Yeah, and then that would at least assign us an initial random word at this point, but I mean, that's kind of where I'm at, but I couldn't quite figure out how to adjust it on a certain event because I haven't figured out which event I wanted to use. But that should at least get us the random word.
So it gave us grows, which, is that one of the words? It says it seems a little short for that, but maybe it is. Yep, okay, that's a word. Never heard of that word before, but all right, I'll believe it. Yep.
Yeah,
So
now each time when you refresh the page, it should give you a new word.
Yep, that works. Yeah, so it looks like my understanding of use effect was a little incomplete because use effect is essentially, you can't set state in that, I suppose. So I'm sure there's another way to do that, but for now we'll leave use effect alone. I'm gonna leave that commented out, or get rid of it, I should say. So at the very least, right now, we have our word set at the beginning. And we should be able to pass it down to puzzle display as props, right? So we could say puzzle, oh, wrong place. Puzzle equals puzzle, like so. And now the puzzle display has northwestward as a prop. Great. All right, any questions so far about what we've done? No questions?
And no,
Mhm.
the use state with the guest letters, or that there's an empty array.
Yes.
Is that to? Is it? I'm assuming that's empty, so they can be populated when the person guesses the letter.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, so now we need to make sure that our puzzle display can show either underscores for letters that have been guessed, and underscores for letters that haven't been guessed yet, and letters that have been guessed for other things. So in that case, it may need more than just the puzzle as props, right? It may also need the guessed letters as well. So that way it knows which letters have been guessed and which ones haven't been. All right, so now we need to make a function that can essentially check to make sure, like, to format our puzzle string correctly. So we could have a function called format puzzle. And okay, so how do we update our string to be, to be formatted correctly to show our underscores when they're supposed to be there?
Do a map.
Yeah, we could do a map. So we could say something like, we call it puzzle string equal, and then we would map over props dot puzzle dot map. And the question is, all right, so we get over that, and what do we want to do? What do we want to return in our map function? Because quickly, going back over map. So what does map actually do?
Runs
It
each element.
iterates through each item in the array, and it gives you the index at the same time.
So it iterates through each thing in the array, and I do need to say, like, call it letter, like so. But what map does specifically,
It runs each element of the array through the function that you're providing in the map function and returns that value, and all of that is returned in a new array.
exactly. So essentially, I'm going to run a function on each letter in this string, and return an array with each of these, with whatever the return value is of this function as the thing that fills that array. So I could do something like, all right, I need to check if the letter has been guessed or not, right? So I could say if, trying to get out of Python mode, because in Python you can just say if letter in guessed letters, but that's not true. You can't do that here. So I'm always trying to remember how that works.
Are you sure?
No, maybe you can do that in JavaScript.
Let's open up a node thing and try.
What was the question?
If you can just go if letter in guessed letters, like you would in Python.
Oh, I don't know. I've never seen that before.
You can always just look it up. So JavaScript,
That would make things too easy.
if item in array.
Well, they
Oh,
have
it
like,
includes.
I was thinking they have like for each, because that's basically kind of what the Python equivalent that you're trying to do in JavaScript would be.
See the chat.
The words, or in this case, whatever the list is, dot for each, and then.
You should be able to use includes.
Yeah, though it looks like Julian was able to do something in something else syntax as well. So let's try it that way, and if it doesn't work, we'll try it the other way. So you can say,
Yeah, it works in node 12.
yep, so I can say if letter in props.guessed letters. Then we will return letter. Else we'll return an underscore. And then at the end, we want to return our puzzle string is the idea. So let's see what happens when we run this. So I'm going to make an H1 here. And inside of that, I'm going to run format puzzle. It says format puzzle is not defined. Okay, what did I do wrong? There we go. Uh-oh, props.puzzle.map is not a function. All right, so does anyone know why this didn't work?
I had that problem yesterday and I forgot how I solved it. It was telling me that about match.
Yeah, so if what I'm thinking is JavaScript string map. Map only works on arrays. So we'll need to split this, I believe. All right, so it looks like we've got a bunch of underscores, which is not very well formatted, but it is something. So maybe we can just do something like, all right, we want there to be a space, so we can make sure.
If you switch to dash, will there be a space?
Good question. So I don't know if there will be a dash, if there will be a space if I use a dash instead of an underscore, but the requirements did specifically say an underscore in this case.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
No worries. All right, so now I have this thing right here. I don't know if it'll work yet if I've guessed the correct letters because we haven't implemented that functionality, but we do have a bunch of underscores that I believe should have the same number of letters as the puzzle thing, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I refresh the page, now it's only four letters, just like it is here. Perfect. All right. What questions do you have about how we've done this part? The way we've done map, that makes sense, and how we called on this function here.
And I'm already using split, or what exactly is props.puzzle?
So when we render our puzzle display here, we passed in the word that we're going to guess as a prop called puzzle. Same thing with guessed letters. And props gets handed in here, and props works much like a JavaScript object. So we check our inspector here. We can see puzzle display in props now has two things. It has guessed letters and puzzle as the word that we kind of passed in as an argument to it. So when I say props.puzzle, I'm referring to this, which got
Yeah,
passed
I
in.
didn't know if it was a string or not. I was kind of...
Yes, it is a string. And the reason we had an error earlier is you can't call map on a string in JavaScript. You have to call it on an array. So we split the string into an array using the .split method.
Okay.
And I realize now that puzzle string is a little poorly named because technically it's not a string, it's an array. So I'll just call this puzzle array just to be clear about what's actually getting returned. All right. So in that case, we have one of our components done. So the next one, as it says, is a component that contains a text input and a button to submit the guessed letter. If the letter submitted has already been guessed, display an alert. All right, so let's start by making this a component. So again, should we make this one functional or class-based? At this point, I'm willing to do either one because I want to make sure that we have experience doing both.
Can they be different? I thought like one was class, they ought to be class, or one was function, they ought to be function.
Yeah, they can definitely be different. You can combine functional and class-based components in any kind of configuration you want. All right, let's make it a class-based component just to mix things up. So import React and component from React. I'm going to make a class called letter input, which extends component. And we will export default letter input down here. We always need to have the render function, which is going to return whatever we render. So I'm going to return, again, I'm just going to put a div here just so it's returning something. And then let's import it here just to make sure we can get it on the page. All right, so if we look here, the components, we have a letter input. We were able to successfully render it, even though there's nothing there. All right, great. So letter input, as it said, is supposed to have a text input and a button. So input type equals text. and a button that says guess. There it is. Excellent. All right, so now we have that. So now we need to make it so that when we actually guess something, it should update our state up here, right? Because we should be able to change our guessed letters based on whether or not the guess is correct. Well, it should update guessed letters either way, and that should update everything else. So the question is, I'm gonna run here. How much should letter input know about what letters have been guessed? Should it know a lot? Should it know nothing?
Nothing.
Yes, exactly. In this case, letter input, all it needs to do is be able to update state in the app when we hit the button. But it doesn't actually need to know whether or not the letters have been, whether or not a letter's been guessed. It doesn't need to do that. We're going to make that function here in our app component. So I'm going to call this one handle guess. We're going to need to be able to take event as an argument. And just to make sure it works, I'm going to try something like, I'm going to say let guess equal event.target.value. Well, let's just call it event.target for now. And console.log guess. Just to make sure we can get it working. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass down handle guess as props to letter input. So I'm going to say handle guess equals handle guess, which means letter input is going to have a function now as a prop that it didn't have before. And it doesn't need to know how this function works. It just needs to be able to call it. So there it is, f handle guess. So now I need to do something like onClick equals this.props.handle guess. And let's see what console.logs when we click on guess. Just click something here, put something there. Go to the console. All right, so this isn't exactly what we're looking for, but we have seen that a function defined outside of the component can still be triggered from within it. Any questions about that? That makes sense?
I guess I'm partly kind of lost in the sense of wasn't the letter input area also supposed to display the previously guessed letters? I thought that was one of the requirements from the README.
There's also a component that displays letters that are not part of the word. So I think that's maybe what you're thinking of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I was combining component number 2 and number 3 into one. So.
All right, so in any case, we need to be able to get the value from our input here when the button gets clicked. So we need to do some DOM traversal. So if I remember correctly, we should just be able to use something like JavaScript previous sibling. Very handy method. So if we go here to our handle guess function, if we do guess.previous sibling, do we need to call that like a, no, we don't need to call it. So now that gives us our input, which means that can get us our value. So you can say let guess equal event.target.previous sibling.value. So now if I console.log guess, I should be able to see the letter. There it is. If I change it, we have our value. Now that we have that, then we can actually, decide whether or not it whether it works. So looking at our README, it says right here that if the letter submitted has already been guessed, we display an alert. So let's start by saying if guess is already in guessed letters, then we say alert, letter has already been guessed. Else, we want to set guessed letters to be, well, in this case, all right, so how do we use set guessed letters to add this letter to our array? Because we can't just do set guessed letters dot append. That's not how it works. And we know we're not supposed to update state directly, right? We're not supposed to go guessed letters dot append letter. That's not how we're supposed, or guess. That's not how we're supposed to do it. So does anyone have an idea of how we can use set guessed letters in order to update our array?
You could use the spread operator, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we can use the spread operator. And how does the spread operator work?
I might screw this up, but basically it iterates over the array or object that you give it and then copies the elements into a new array.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So the spread operator is very, very handy. It's especially in React. So it's ... So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to essentially making a copy of guessed letters and I'm going to copy that into a new array along with guess. And that creates an entirely new array to set guessed letters to, as opposed to appending it and mutating it directly. And if we check this in action, we should be able to see it. Okay, I need to check, make sure my components are updating. So guessed letters has nothing in it. If I hit A, there it is. If I hit A again, uh-oh. All right, so we do have a problem here in that we haven't gotten our alert working, but we can add things to the array at least. So the question is, why isn't our alert working?
So again, I think using in is the wrong answer here because in checks for indexes. You want to use includes.
Ah, okay. So if guessed letters dot includes guess.
Yeah.
So A is there, and if I guess A again, letter has already been guessed. I'll try B. Nice. And if we want to, we can also just do do something very simple of like to clear the form. You can say, event.target.value now equals empty string. Oops, event.target.previous sibling. Whoops. So now if I guess A, it gets cleared from the form, but I can still add things to my state. All right. Any questions so far? About the spread operator or event handling or anything like that? All right, so let's get our last component going, wrong letters. So wrong letters is just supposed to display all of the letters that have been guessed that aren't in the word. All right, so let's make this one a functional component. I'm going to import React from React. Function wrong letters. We know this is going to have to take props and export default wrong letters and import it here. So now we should be able to see it in our components. Uh-oh. Oh yeah, I didn't return a render. Whoops. Return div like so. There's our component. All right, so it says displays all the letters that are not part of the puzzle word. So in order to do that, what's it going to need from app.js in order to know which letters are and aren't in the puzzle word?
Guest letters, property.
It's going to need to know guest letters. And I think the way we have it set up here, right now we're adding all of our letters to the guest letters array, regardless of whether or not they're in the word. So we may need to pass in the puzzle as well. And maybe that's not the best way to do it, but we've kind of dug ourselves into a hole already. So we're going to have to have something that just says, all right, render all of the letters that aren't in the puzzle word. So we can call it, render wrong letters. And how do we want to forward this? Do you want maybe just put it in a big string? We could also add it to an unordered list. Any thoughts? Yeah, we can just put it inside a big string. So it's going to be very similar actually to what we did here. Also, I'm going to change this one from in to includes because I think that's, again, kind of messing us up like it did earlier. So here we don't need to do dot split because we're getting a string. Actually, we still might. So no, we can do string dot includes. I believe that's the thing that JavaScript can do. So we could do something like, all right, so let wrong letters equal be props.guest letters dot map letter. And then we would say if props.guest letters, props.puzzle dot includes letter. Then we want to return letter. And at the end of this, we want to return long letters.
Does that?
Don't you want to negate that?
Yeah, I was gonna say if it's there and you guessed it, it'd be the exact same thing as if we're trying to fill it out. So
You want to say if not props.puzzle.includes, right?
You're right. So and down here we could say render wrong letters. Let's see what happens. Uh-oh, cannot read property map of undefined. So props.guessLetters couldn't read that. It said it was undefined. So that's a problem.
Are you passing puzzle in as a prop? I didn't see.
I believe I am. Let's take a look.
Misspelled guess letters.
Nope.
They need to split it maybe too.
All right, so if I try to guess a letter here that I know isn't in it, there it is. If it is in it, it shows up there. If I try to guess Y again, letter has already been guessed. All right, pretty neat. And right now I can just keep on guessing letters. So they're not formatted very well or anything like that, but they do show up. So it looks like we have or at least our very basic functionality here. It's still not a fully functional Hangman game, but it is getting there. And the reason that the puzzle display is updating now instead of when it wasn't earlier is because we changed it from the in notation to the includes notation. And that looks like it allowed it to update automatically. It looks like in was causing some problems. Because normally when your props change, thanks to what's happening up here, then every component that uses that props also gets re-rendered. Okay, what questions do you have about that? Okay. So we take a look at our README here. If someone guesses more than 6 letters that aren't part of the word, an alert displaying that the game is over should be displayed. So we're going to have to change things up a bit. We're going to have to be able to keep track of how many guesses there have been. And we're going to have to update our handle guess function to update that and react if there are too many wrong guesses.
Do we need to actually keep track of the guess letters, or couldn't we just use the length function on the incorrect letters? Because we're already displaying them.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't we just call a function on the length, and if the length is 6?
We could do that, yeah. Right now, again, our guessed letters are set to include correct letters. So the guessed letters is just every letter that's been guessed, period.
Wait, sorry, the wrong letters, when we're pulling that out,
mm-hmm.
when we're updating that, couldn't we throw in the function in there if in the wrong letters the length of that wrong letters is 6, then throw the error?
So we could make sure it throws an alert when that gets updated, yeah. But it won't stop people from guessing more. Because render wrong letters only job is to update the display. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we update our guessed letters. So we want to make sure that when it gets that when we input something and we're out of guesses, then we want to make sure that we can't, anytime we try to enter something in, it won't update anything in our DOM. But I do like the idea of using length. So I think I have an idea of a way we can use that. So instead of saying, so we could keep track of guesses using state, but there's another way to do that. So let's say that we can, actually, let's make another function to handle this, because otherwise it's getting we're getting a little, we need to separate our concerns a bit. So I'm going to call this one check for lost game. And I'm going to narrow down my list of letters to be only the guessed letters that aren't correct. So I know we kind of already did that earlier, but there's another way of doing that. So you can say let wrong letters equal, so guessed letters dot split. No, it's not, sorry, it's not an array, it's a string. And we're going to use dot filter. What does filter do?
It runs each element in the array through your filter function, which you're providing. And if it passes true, then it will include it in the copy of the array. If it's false, then it won't include it.
Yep. So it works similarly to map, except it'll only pass things into the new array that evaluate to true here.
That's like a list comprehension with a conditional clause in Python.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, it is, because several times I'm like, how do I filter in Python? And I'm looking for a filter. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, it's a list comprehension.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I realized that I can do this in just one line, so I don't need brackets there. So I'm just going to say guessed, so it'd be puzzle dot includes letter. And that should narrow down our list to only the wrong letters. And then what we can do is we can just say return wrong letters dot length is greater than or equal to 6.
Again, wouldn't we have to negate the?
You're right, I keep on forgetting that, thank you. So it'd be not puzzle dot includes letter. Nope, okay, let's see here. Unexpected token, what did I do wrong? Oh, duh. There we go. So now I should be able to say if check for lost game, do an alert, says game is game over. And then I can put all the rest of this inside an else. So let's see if that works. So I'm just gonna keep on guessing things that aren't there. Game over. And I can keep on trying to guessing and it still won't allow me to do anything else. All right, any questions about how that worked?
I know, I guess it would be an extended stretch, but if I'm clicking on the alert that says game over, clicking that button to close it, could we throw in some type of thing that'll actually reset the whole thing? In other words, create a new word and clear out, basically reset the state to beginning state?
Good question. I'm not sure if there's a way to have an event listener for clicking the alert button, but there is probably a way to trigger a full re-render. Let's look that up. So I can just say, React re-render page and see what happens. Force a React component to re-render. Let's see what this guy says. So there's something called this.forceUpdate. Which seems like it's mainly for a class-based component if it uses the keyword this. But let's see what we can, if we can do anything with that. So yeah, it looks like it's not showing me this.forceUpdate. So let's see something that we can do that with force update with React hooks. Yes?
I was going to say on the previous search page towards the very bottom, it looked like there's something how to refresh a page.
This?
Yeah, now it's up towards the top. Yeah, that looked like something.
Let's take a look. So we could use refresher page using JavaScript using window.location.reload. So that's one way to do it. Updating state, that automatically does it. Okay, let's try with the window.location.reload. It's a little bit of a crude way to do it, but it hopefully will work. So window.location.reload, and they include false there. The method takes an optional parameter, which by default is false. If set to true, we will do a complete refresh from the server and not from the cached version of the page. And in this case, that makes sense. I don't think we want it to get it from, to cache research. So if I guess a bunch of wrong letters, except I'm guessing all the right letters this time. It says game over, and I refresh the page. So it looks like that's one way to do it. And it looks like in this case, it does actually wait until you get out of the alert in order to trigger the reload. All right, any other questions about Hangman?
Well, I had one question, I guess, about I call them ellipses, but the ... method.
The spread operator, yeah.
Yeah, what's the long form equivalent? Just so I can kind of, I mean, if we don't want to waste the time on the recording for it, I can understand. We wait a little bit later, but I was just trying to find out what exactly would that be if I were to write it out in plain old vanilla? Because I know it's supposed to save things, or it's supposed to cut down on having to type, but I'm still just trying to wrap my head around exactly what the ellipses are.
Yeah, I'm not sure if what the long way to do that would be, because it's kind of a unique thing. Essentially what it does, and I'll kind of try to do something in the comments here to kind of show you. So let's say I've got an array of, let's say, array equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If I were to do ... array, what it would return would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 just kind of separated. It literally unpacks them. And so you can use that to, for example, passing an array to a method that expects multiple things. So if I had a method that says, add 5 numbers, if I passed it the array directly, if it wasn't expecting array, it wouldn't know what to do with that. But if I passed it in ... array, I'd be passing it in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as separate arguments.
Okay, so in the context of above the guest letters would be the list unpacked, and then.
Exactly. So in the context above, even though it looks like guest letters plus guess, like let's say my guest letters was already A, B, and C. I'd be passing it. I would be setting guest letters to A, B, C, and the new guess, because that's what the spread operator does. It separates them out like so.
Okay, that makes some sense. I was thinking for some reason with the comma there, that we're like maybe trying to do some type of key value assigning pair or something like. Okay.
I actually I linked it in the Zoom chat, Daniel, and the docs actually have really good like every use case that this thing has. It's like it's a super long page, but they do like by example, like if you want to copy an array, this is how you use the spread operator to do it, and if you want to do like a slice or copy and add an additional item, it won't affect the array, the original array. It shows every use case, and then the ones that Noah was just showing with passing it as like multiple arguments and everything. So I didn't know about this. This was actually super interesting when you guys just explained it. When y'all just explained it. So
Yep. Yeah, the spread operator is very, very useful, and you're going to be using it a lot in React. Whenever you're dealing with a data structure that you need to update, you should essentially be using the spread operator because it kind of gives you that copy of it and allows you to do this without directly mutating your state. Because a big kind of thing, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago about pure functions. So they don't have any side effects. They don't mutate anything directly. They always just return something new. That's how your updating state should always be, is instead of updating that variable, you replace that variable with something new. And you can use the spread operator to make an exact copy of your data structures. Okay. All right, so let's take a 13-minute break. So let's be back here at 10:45, and we will get started with our lecture for today.